pleasure. Thank you.
With me on the program now, the Assistant Minister for Human Services, Senator Mitch Fifield, and the Shadow Assistant Treasurer, Andrew Leigh. Gentlemen, good morning to you both.
Good morning, Kieran.
Ed Killerstein says it's embarrassing. He's baffled as to how these votes could have gone missing. For an AEC with such a strong reputation, this is clearly its low point, isn't it?
Well, it is embarrassing, and Australians, I think, have always taken a great pride in our electoral system, that we have a truly national system where we have consistency of application, consistency of voting methods, in contrast to the United States, where it varies state by state and county by county. So we've got good reason to be proud of the electoral system that we do have, but this is something which you want to make sure doesn't happen. I think the Commissioner's right. What this boils down to is in effect the disenfranchisement of people, but there is quite rightly an independent investigation by former Commissioner Mick Kilty, and look, we shouldn't prejudge what he will find, but it's important that he concludes his work.
Senator Fifield, when I spoke to the Commissioner, he was clearly upset at that very thing, the fact that those voters had been disenfranchised, and apologised unreservedly to them, understandably. But I suppose when you've got such a large project as a voting day, with so many people, for example, contracted just for the day or a few days before and after, human error is almost inevitable at some point, isn't it?
Look, you know, mistakes always happen with any process that's run by people, but what you need to ensure is that mistakes are minimised, and Mr Kilty is going to be investigating to try and determine what happened. He may well make recommendations about future processes, but we shouldn't preempt those. We should wait for him to conclude his work.
What do you think about the prospect of electronic voting, Andrew Leigh? You've spent a fair bit of time in the United States, and as Senator Fifield said, various states have different approaches to it. Do you think that would help minimise these sorts of, well, to put it bluntly, this sort of debacle?
Kieran, I think it's interesting and I think it's worth exploring. The great appeal to me of electronic voting is that it brings down the informal rate, which has been climbing over recent years. You have to intend to spoil the ballot rather than doing it by accident in an electronic voting system. But as Ed Killerstein has said, it's a complicated thing to move towards. I'm pretty confident that the AEC will look carefully at this. As Mitch has said, it's a great Australian institution. We often help out in countries in our region with elections. And having lived in the US in 2000 through the Bush-Gore election with hanging chads and all, I'm pretty comfortable at the quality of our institutions. And the fact that this hasn't happened for 100 years, I think, does speak to the quality of the AEC. Even great institutions sometimes make mistakes.
Yeah, we won't be going to the Chad system. I can safely bet that.
I think so.
Now,
neither dimpled nor hanging.
No, that's right. On the likelihood of a by-election, we've never seen that for a Senate before, state Senate vote. There are reports this morning that the Prime Minister will see this as another referendum on the carbon tax, given the Labor position on it.
Well, look, there may well be the taking of this matter to the High Court sitting as the Court of Disputed Returns, and if that happens, and if there is in effect a statewide by-election
it's inevitable,
called,
isn't it? It's inevitable, really.
Well,
to clear this up, you'd think it's almost inevitable.
There are quite a few ifs there, but if it did happen, then it would really be an opportunity for Mr Shorten to explain to the Australian people why he didn't get the message from the last election, why he hasn't come out and said, we got it, we hear it, we know we got it wrong, we're going to support the abolition of the carbon tax. His position at the moment is anything but clear. The result of the last federal election in relation to the mandate of this government to abolish the carbon tax was crystal clear. It's time for Mr Shorten to provide some clarity in his position, and if there was, in effect, a state by-election in Western Australia, then Mr Shorten would have a terrific opportunity to explain himself.
A tough starting point, though, WA for Labor. The Liberals won 3 Senate seats. Labor just got the 1. It's the toughest state nationally to be judging the barometer for the Labor Party, isn't
Well,
it?
it needn't be tough for Mr Shorten if he says, hey, we got the message. We know we said there wouldn't be a carbon tax. We know we gave you a carbon tax despite saying that we wouldn't give you one. We understand. We got it wrong. You've sent us a message. We're going to support the abolition of the carbon tax. That's what he should say.
It's risky. Do you concede that this position from Labor is a risky one, that just a couple of months after a thumping win to the coalition, that you're saying that you're not going to provide an unreserved backing of the repeal of the carbon tax, which anyone who was watching Australian politics over the last couple of years would have said that that was pretty much central to the election?
Well, Kieran, this isn't pure politics for us. This is a matter of listening to the scientists and putting a cap on carbon pollution, as every serious economist would have us do. That's where our policy is founded. The Coalition, of course, supported an ETS in 2007, didn't support one the last couple of elections. They've been, as Malcolm Turnbull says of Tony Abbott, a weather vane on the issue of pricing carbon. Labor's position...
They hit the right mark, though, didn't they? They might have varied and been a weather vane, as you put it, but clearly an endorsed one at the September 7 poll.
What mandate theory says is that you should do after the election what you'll say you'd do before the election. Mandate theory, for example,
if you're
says...
endorsed, if you actually get a mandate, if the public actually vote for you...
Mandate theory applies to governments as it does to oppositions. It means that in 2007, having campaigned on ETS, Tony Abbott should have voted for one on the floor of the parliament. But it doesn't. Mandate theory doesn't mean that oppositions roll over like poodles, put our legs up in the air and say, you can do whatever you like. My voters, I think, would be very disappointed in me if I went all the way through that campaign saying that I believed in the science of climate change and then at the end said, look, the science is so unimportant to me that I'll back a policy which isn't going to reduce emissions.
So, Kieran, this is the heart of the problem, and I'm glad Andrew has been open with it, and that is Labor see an election loss as much of a validation and endorsement for policies as a government that wins an election. That is just completely bizarre. And I think good luck in any pub putting a proposition to the Australian people.
The point that Mr Lee made is that your leader was of a similar belief a few years ago and did the same thing in opposition.
We took a very clear policy position to the election, which was resoundingly endorsed. Labor took a very clear position to the election, which was to support the carbon tax.
You look at recent history, you also supported an ETS in 07 and then did not support it in the parliament.
But Kieran, you cannot have a situation where an opposition says the fact that we lost the election and lost it overwhelmingly is in some way a validation of our policy position.
Right, let's go to Andrew.
So in 2010, we went clearly to the people saying we wanted a mining tax. We won that election and the Coalition voted against the mining tax. We, on your logic, had a mandate for that and the Coalition should have voted for the mining tax.
I don't think the 2010 election is a great one to cite because the result there was anything but...
So now your mandate theory starts to fall in tatters. It doesn't apply to Tony Abbott in 2007. Doesn't apply to Tony Abbott in 2010.
Talking about overwhelming election victories, overwhelming endorsements of policies which we had at the last election, and you guys did not have at 2010. In fact, the swing was very much the other way.
I've got to move on quickly. I want to talk about Malcolm Turnbull's comments yesterday on gay marriage. He says that there is the likelihood that the Coalition will move to a free or conscience vote in this parliament. Is that something you support?
Well, there may be another piece of legislation to do with same-sex marriage that comes into the parliament this term. It's a possibility.
Very real possibility.
And if it does, our party room at that time will consider that matter. We'll consider what the appropriate mechanism is for us as a parliamentary party to address that matter. What would you say? Well, I want to hear the views of my colleagues in the party room. I think that's the appropriate place for us to have this discussion.
The Liberal Party, you'd think, would support free votes, though, generally, wouldn't it?
Well, I mean, it's important to recognise where free votes come into play. Free votes come into play where a party doesn't have a policy, doesn't have a position, which is why previously it hasn't come into play with the Liberal Party, because we have had a position. So If the Liberal Party did not have a formal position on this matter, then of course it would be a free vote. But that really is the threshold issue: is does the party have a formal position on something or not? That's what determines if you have a free vote.
Even if there was a free vote, it's unlikely to secure the passage through the lower house anyway, isn't it? Given where the numbers have been recently, even if there was a conscience vote in 2012, last year, when the last vote was taken, it wouldn't have got through.
I think attitudes are changing fast on this one, Kieran. I certainly respect people on both sides of the debate, but I do think now you've had Conservative leaders in New Zealand and Britain putting through same-sex marriage on the conservative basis that they believe that marriage is a stabilising institution for the family and for children, then the debate is shifting. Australia will have same-sex marriage at some stage in the next 20 years. So the question is really when, rather than will it happen. I'm disappointed that Senator Brandis has taken the cowardly way out with the ACT laws of taking a very unusual challenge to the ACT laws to the High Court. It's a political issue. If Senator Brandis doesn't believe the ACT laws should stand, he should bring a bill to the floor of the Parliament to overturn them, not rush off to the High Court, spending significant amounts of taxpayer money trying to stop same-sex couples in Canberra walking down the altar.
A quick break. We'll be right back with more on that issue. Stay with us. This is AIM Agenda. Thanks for your company. With me this morning, the Shadow Assistant Treasurer Andrew Leigh and the Assistant Minister for Human Services, Senator Mitch Fifield. Let's move on. Andrew Leigh, I want to ask you about Bruce Hawker, his book that suggested Kevin Rudd was considering on the election night whether to stop short of conceding the leadership. It was only something that he considered for 40 minutes or so, and then at 9:10 revealed that he had to, it was time to hang up the spurs. That would have sent shudders through some in the Labor Party reading that, wouldn't it?
I haven't had time to read the book, Kieran. It's something I might get to at some stage. But we're focused on delivering for the Australian people and listening to the Australian people. We've just had a great leadership contest, which has brought a whole raft of new people into the Labor Party because they now get to have a say on who's the next Labor leader, something no other political party has. So that revitalisation has produced, I think, a great leader in Bill Shorten.
You're comfortable with Mr Rudd staying indefinitely as well?
That's a matter entirely for Mr Rudd. He's, as a former Prime Minister, I think, earned the right to make his own decisions, and certainly he's been a strong servant of the Australian people from right through from saving hundreds of thousands of jobs in the global financial crisis to giving that long overdue apology to the stolen generations.
I want to ask Senator Fifield about some difficult things on your side of politics, GrainCorp and the proposed sale to that American firm Archer Daniel Midlands, I think it is, and Joe Hockey will make the final call on that at the end of this year. The Nationals are pretty clear that they're not going to cop it. Laurie Oakes reported on Saturday in his Daily Telegraph column that some national frontbenchers might quit on the spot if Joe Hockey approves this sale.
Well, one thing is clear, and that is as a nation and as a government, we are very positive about foreign investment. Foreign investment has been important to Australia since the first fleet. We need foreign investment. We want Australia to be an attractive place for foreign investment. The matter that you raised will ultimately be decided by Joe Hockey as Treasurer. This isn't a decision of government as a whole. It is statutorily invested in Joe Hockey, and colleagues have a range of views. But
as expressed very forcefully yesterday by Mr Truss, from the top down, the Nationals are saying we don't want it.
Yeah, look, colleagues have a range of views, and that's a good and healthy thing. But this will be a decision for Mr Hockey.
But if he knocked it back, what does that say about the Liberal Party? Arguing you're open for business. Australia's open for business again.
Well, look, Joe Hockey will make a decision on the basis of the national interest. He will take all relevant considerations into account, and then he will make his decision.
So if a couple of Nats, the front benches, threaten to quit, that would not be something that he weighs up as well?
What he considers is the national interest. beginning and end of story.
That's entirely appropriate, isn't it, Andrew Lee?
Well, Warren Truss certainly has some interesting views on foreign investment, suggesting yesterday that a US investment of a company which is 0.2% of the stock market, were that to be approved, that it would threaten Australia's very viability as a financial centre. He clearly has some fears for Mr Hockey's management of the economy if he thinks that a US buy-up of 0.2% of the stock market threatens the financial stability of Australia. But you've also then got...
So you support the sale?
The Labor Party will take a national interest view on this, but I'm certainly noting that there are some very extreme views within the government on foreign investment. You had Mr Abbott in Beijing saying that in general the coalition would not welcome Chinese state-owned enterprise investment in Australia, despite the fact that most Chinese investment in Australia is from state-owned enterprises. So you've got this sort of DLP resurgence coupled with the agrarian socialists and the nationals, which are going to make it very hard to get a pro-investment position through in Australia and threaten trade deals such as the China trade deal.
I've got to interrupt.
Remember Kevin Rudd, an economic nationalist, he described himself as?
We've got to go.
Let's not forget that.
Gentlemen, it's good to see you.
You too.
This Monday. Mitch Fifield, Andrew Lee. A quick break.
Thanks,
We'll be
Kieran.
right
Thanks,
back.
Mitch.